All right, this is Tanya Pearson interviewing Kat Arthur on October 9th, 2016 in Los Angeles, California for the Women of Rock Oral History Project. Thank you so much. It's so nice to finally meet you. Like I said, we're going to start way at the beginning. So if you could talk a little bit about your childhood. I know you grew up in New Jersey, and a little bit about your family of origin and what you were like as a kid.
Well, I was born in New Jersey. I was born in Princeton. And my father was an associate professor there, and my mother taught at Rutgers, which is a university that's right outside of Princeton. And I grew up there until I was, well, at 13, I went to a boarding school. So I went to, it's kind of funny because I'm half Jewish, and I went to a Sacred Heart school when I was little, so I got to meet nuns. But they weren't like the parochial school nuns. They were what are called the Madame de Sacre-Cœur, and they're associated with the Jesuit priest. So they're a little bit more, they have to have had a college education. And actually, there was a nun there called Mother Gannon that finally left the order and married a priest later on. But she was the one that got me into music and singing. And I knew at 7 that I wanted to sing. And I guess as a kid coming up, my parents divorced when I was very early. My father was British and wanted to take me to England with him so he could assure himself of being able to get back into this country. And it was, I really didn't know my dad too well coming up, and my mother had developed a bad rapport with him, I think. And I don't know, I had a very close family with my mother's side of the family, and like I said, we were in New Jersey, and my mother's family was very, I guess you could say, affluent. My godfather's George Gallup of Gallup Poles. And it's really funny, I know all these people, and I know a lot of influential people, but coming up, I never had the money that these people do. And when I went off to boarding school, I really realized that, because you get put in these situations where you're with a family that's all they think about, and you think about other things like art and stuff like that. And that's what really kept me, I think, sane as a child, because I used to listen to the radio a lot. And I remember thinking, what I don't have, I would overcome with music. And I would always, from a very early age. And I remember, I guess it would be like 10 o'clock at night, and I would be in bed, and I'd have that radio on listening to it. And that was sort of like a bloodline for me. At really early ages, I remember buying my first record at 7. So
what was it?
It was a Beatles album. And then I bought the Rolling Stones and was changed forever.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I had. Unfortunately, my brother just passed away, and I didn't even know about it until he passed away in January. And I just found out about it. So I'm not close with my siblings. They're all half-sisters and brothers. My father remarried twice after he left my mother, and he split up. And my mother was married twice. She was married to my half-brothers, my oldest brother. And then there was me on my mother's side. So, but I knew him a little bit, but he went to boarding schools also, so I didn't see him a lot. And he was 8 years older than I am.
Okay. And so you went to boarding school. What kind of student were you? Or I think there's this like stereotype about people who play in punk bands as being kind of rebellious or rebels, and you were really into music. Were you that kind of kid, or did you sort of...
I think I was a delinquent at an early age. I started smoking cigarettes at 7. I burned half our barn down at 7. Everything at 7 and 8 years old started to happen. And it's when I think my mom was really concerned about me, as far as, she started becoming, she wasn't as lenient with me. And she made sure I did my homework. I was sometimes I was really good at academics, and other times I stunk, because it just depended on what was going on. When there's a lot of turmoil in a child's life, it affects them. And when you have a mother, unfortunately, that was about the same time my mother started drinking. And it affected me a great deal. And I isolated myself. And I lived on a farm about that age. And I was isolated from, I think I had one friend or two. And other than the people I saw at school, I was on this farm. It was a 100-acre farm, and you'd have to drive to go see your friends. So it was like I had to find things to do myself, and consequently, idle hands for a little kid, you know.
Burn the barn down.
Yeah, burn the barn down. So I started getting into like a little bit of trouble at that age, and I don't know if it was for attention or what it was for, because I don't feel like it was for attention, because I didn't want my mother's attention. I wasn't like one of these kids that was saying, "Mommy, look at me, watch me do this." It wasn't about that. I just know, like, I liked music, I liked writing, I liked doing plays and things like that, and trying to write plays, and feeling sometimes like teachers didn't understand me, maybe. That was the only problem.
And you said you started singing when you were very young, too?
I was, I was like in first grade and got in the choir and would sing in the choir, and like I said, I was at the Sacred Heart until I was in sixth grade, and then I got to go to a public school, which I loved, because they had boys and there was lots of kids to play with, and it was mixed. And by then my mom was doing the Head Start program, and we had moved into Princeton, into the town of Princeton. I wasn't so far away, and I had more playmates and stuff. And every summer we had all these inner city kids that would come out, and they'd swim in our pool, and we'd have a blast, and the neighbors hated us. And my mother my mother went into real estate, and she sold the first house to our black chief of police in Princeton, and made more friends that way. My mother was a big liberal, so that was one thing I love about my mom. She was very she opened my mind towards a lot of things as far as people and the differences in people. And as a result, it's like when I got to travel, by doing tours and stuff, it was just, even when I went like down through Mexico and places like that, not on tour, it was just such a relief to, know I had a parent that had, opened these doors for me rather than shut them, because I see children that at an early age, the doors have already been shut for them. You see it now all the time. That's what my God, we saw it tonight, So.
I'll bring up the debate again.
Yeah, really?
Okay, so your first record was the Beatles, started singing at a very young age. So I guess I have like a two-part question. Was it something that your mother like encouraged, and was it something that helped you to make friends in school, or like an activity that you did with other people, or was it more of like a solitary hobby, singing and being creative?
Well, it's something I just enjoyed. My mom, she encouraged my artwork and writing more. And the music, yeah, as long as it was with school, but to tell her I wanted to be a singer, she sort of, didn't recognize that as being any type of a job to get as a child or look forward to. Plus she was, my mom she grew up during the Second World War, so she was like at the in-between stage. The ceiling hadn't been lifted for women in work, really, unless you were just one of these, gung-ho type of people. And it was really my grandmother, in the long run, when I look back at everything, that had a lot to do with, if you want something in life, you go after it, no matter what. And my grandfather. They were the ones that, allowed me to do what I wanted to do, and encouraged that. Because when my mother found out I was going into bands later on in life, she was not happy, because I dropped out of college.
Oh, okay. So that was my next, really know nothing about this like beginning part of your life at all. So I was wondering what kind of a student you were in high school, or if there were any expectations that you go to college, or if you had other plans for yourself, like at that point.
Yeah, I was supposed to go to college. My mother went to Smith, and you go to either Smith, Wellesley, or Radcliffe.
Do you know where this is housed? Didn't I tell you this collection's housed at Smith College? So you can tell your mom, okay?
And it was like you want to be one of the Ivy Leagues. You want to marry an Ivy Leaguer. Like my uncle went to Princeton, my dad taught at Princeton. My brothers goes to Dartmouth, and I wound up going to a small college out here. Originally, I was going to go to RISD because I wanted to be an art major, and I had I don't know, a couple of weeks to get into a college because I decided I wasn't going to go, and I wound up going to a university, Pepperdine University out in Malibu. And I thought, oh, this would be great. I can still see my boyfriend in San Diego and, we'll still do the band thing. And I go there and they have absolutely no art department. They have no journalism. They have no writing, nothing. So it wasn't the right school for me. And then I sort of got sidetracked, took classes at UCLA and just sort of wandered away from college, and that was it. But as far as being a student, sometimes I was a very good student, and other times I was just not so good. And it depended, I think, what was going on in my household as a child. And as I got older, it depended if I was interested in what I was doing. I just realized this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it. I wanted to write, and I wanted to play music. And I knew that very early. So that's what I did. And I listened to a lot of music coming up and a lot of old records because I loved the blues. There was a channel on Princeton University. It came on Saturday nights and they played nothing but old rhythm and blues. And I was addicted to it.
Yeah. You said just a minute ago that you could keep doing the band thing once you went out to California. Were you in bands in high school or when you were on the East Coast?
Well, I wasn't in bands in high school because I went to boarding school, but when I got kicked out of boarding school, yes. Because what happened was my mother had moved to La Jolla, California, and I was in Maryland going to a school. And they put me on a plane and they sent me to her. And I got to finish my senior year at La Jolla High School and graduated. And while I was there, I met my guitar player from Lethal Weapon, who later became my boyfriend and then my husband. And I was with him for over 16 years. Yeah. And we had a great relationship. We had a really great relationship in the music. And we both knew that. That's what we wanted to do. So it was just a matter of getting out of the school I was in and getting back to him and, getting a place to live and doing what you always do when you start out.
You said that you were really influenced by old blues music.
Mm-hmm.
How did you discover punk, or what made you decide to play that type of music, or how did you get introduced to the...
Well, you got to remember what was going on at the time when I was, a young person. It was the mid-'70s, and there was a lot of disco, which was awful. And the only bands that I really liked at the time were blues bands and that interested me, but a lot of those guys were kind of on their way out. It was I would go in New Jersey, I'd go to Asbury Park, and they had a place there. I'd go see Chuck Berry and Freddie King play and bands like that. And then when I was living in Princeton, when I was younger, I got to see people like Bob Dylan and the Byrds and things like that. And that was cool, but there was nothing, I wanted something that I could identify with. Then the New York Dolls came out, and Iggy, and then there was something different. And there was then, it was oh, I like this. It sounds different. It's not anything else. Then the Ramones came out, and it was oh my God. And then it was Blondie. And then by then I'm out here in California, and I remember the Mask had opened. So Brian and I used to come up from San Diego. We'd take our parents' car and we'd come up here and see them play at the Mask. Then we moved up here, and generally speaking, we'd go out about 3 nights a week. And 2 nights of those were spent at the Mask. when it was underneath the Pussycat Theater, and then later on it was at a place over there on Santa Monica. It was at a banner store where they used to make flags and stuff. And Brendan Mullen was wholly responsible for that. And some of the best bands for $3 to $5, you can't imagine what you'd see. I mean, it was unbelievable. You know, I got to see some of the greatest bands on earth, I think, play there, and for nothing. And there was a whole scene that came out of that, and it was very strong. And then the scene came up in Orange County, and when I was in a band, the first band I was ever in California was a band called the Silencers. And that was with a guy, he had originally had a band called Shock that was sort of a quasi-pop punk band. And he was looking, Brian started playing for him, and they went through a bunch of singers, and then Brian said, well, why don't you let Kat try out? And I did, and then I started playing with this guy, but the music wasn't quite what I wanted. It was too poppy for me. And I think Steve let us play 2 songs. And so we went and we started another band, and it was called Legal Weapon, and Patricia had just left the Bags. And we had sort of revolving guitar players for a while. We had Charlie Vartanian, who was the drummer. He was still in high school at the time. He was only 16. But that's how the Legal Weapon started, and to this day we still play if we get a chance. So
when you started going to shows at the Mask and stuff, what were women's roles in the scene from your individual perspective? Because it seems like the punk scene was like very inclusive of women, and they had more roles than just groupies.
Yeah, they had a lot more. You'd see, you know, the bands were integrated. You know, even if you couldn't play your instrument, it was integrated. You'd see a lot of gals picked up basses. They weren't just singers. They were playing guitar. You know, look at the Go-Go's. They came out of that whole scene. You know, it was totally different. And women were very included in everything, and they weren't talked down to. They were, you know, when you were in a band, it was like there was an equal, you know, respect or disrespect for one another. It was, you know, all the same, but it was totally different, you know. And punk, I think it opened up a lot of doors for gals as far as playing, because before then, who did you really have? You had the Runaways, you had Susie Quattro. You know, then there was another band for a little while that Kim Fowley had called the Orchids that didn't go anywhere. But those were like a lot of kind of preconceived bands by, you know, somebody. These were bands that people started on their own and, you know, wrote their own material. So it's totally different. You know, it wasn't thrown together by a producer.
This is sort of random, but I just thought of it. You're talking about your blues influences and your seeing those 60s bands like the Byrds and stuff. You get called the Janis Joplin of punk a lot.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what you thought about that, if it was kind of like a cheap comparison, or if she's someone that you...
No, I really loved Janis Joplin. I thought she was like awesome. She was one of the few white female vocalists at the time that had that real spark, you know, that said, you know, the way she phrased her music, the way her whole cadence when she sang, and it was believable, you know. And she was like a part of the band. Obviously, she was Janis Joplin, but when Big Brother and the Holding Company came out, I was, you know, and I got Cheap Thrills, and I was like, man, she was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and that was one person that I used to really, you know, yes, that was an influence, very much so.
I was like, I wonder, because I could see it, but I wondered if it was something that people were saying even back then in the 70s when you came up, or if it was more of a, in hindsight, or...
It wasn't, I don't think it was an intentional thing. I mean, I listened to her records and stuff, and I adored her music, but there were a lot of other things. I mean, I adored Tina Turner. You know, I thought she was the bomb. I mean, you had this great voice, you had all this sexuality coming out, and then you had this very strong persona, and that's what I look at in women. It's like, you don't want them just to be just, as some guys say, eye candy or whatever. You want them to be something because, I'm a woman and I have to relate to that. And this was the thing about punk. You started seeing more and more women get into it. And even someone like Deborah Harry, that people would say, oh, she's so pretty or she's so this and that. Well, she wrote her own music, and she had a lot to do with that band. She wasn't just, a good-looking woman out there, singing. I mean, I saw Deborah Harry play the first time, I think it was at the Starwood, and there's no doubt in my mind that she wasn't striking because all that she had to do was stand there and sing, and you were mesmerized by her. But then I thought, when you're sitting there watching her, you're thinking, okay, she wrote this music. She had something to do with it, and she had sense enough to make it work. And it's very hard for women in music. Like I said, you'll take a half a dozen guys that have minimal talent, and they'll get over it faster than a woman that has a lot of talent. And the women will have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, and put up with a lot more havoc.
When you left the first band, the Silencers, that you joined, did you want to start your own band and not join someone else's band, like you and your husband and your guitar player?
Yes.
You wanted a band that was yours and you could write all of
Yes.
your material and have...
Well, I would have been, no, I can't say I would have stayed with Steve Ryan. No, I wouldn't have stayed with that bass player because he was a total Nazi. He was very controlling and telling me how to sing and writing the lyrics, and I didn't sing in that meter, and I sing behind the beat, and he didn't write that way, and it was just, I just wanted to do my own music. So that was pretty much after a while, and I didn't want to sing about some of the stuff he was singing about, because it didn't mean anything to me. I have to sing about things that mean something. So, it was like, I think that I did that for maybe a year. And the other thing was I wanted to play with, even though punk, in a lot of ways, punk's, the whole scene, there were a lot of people that started playing their instruments just when they started a band. And I watched that happen, and some got really, really good. Some kind of just fell off the face of the earth. But a lot of them, they developed their skills. Like, for instance, the Go-Go's. I watched them develop for years, until they got to be like what they are today. And I was sorry to see, that they're not going to be playing. I can't believe that was their last show. It just hasn't sank in yet. But I watched them go from, not really knowing how to play their instruments to like perfecting a sound. And Gina Schock was probably one of the best female drummers around on the scene, without a doubt. And there's a lot of musicians. There's a band called Brainspoon right now. They have a guitar player named Michelle. She's phenomenal. Phenomenal. A lot of girls are, Sylvia Junkowska, phenomenal guitar player. A lot of people, they don't even realize, I had a drummer before that was in Legal Weapon, Jerry Haskins, that was a drummer. Unfortunately, we were going to Europe and she couldn't go with us. And if you didn't know it was a female playing, you would think it was some guy because of the way she hit the drums so hard. She was absolutely amazing.
In the first incarnation of Legal Weapon, you said Patricia Morrison was the very first bass player?
Yes.
Was that, did you want to be in a band with another female, or was gender not really a thing? Because you played, I think, the rest of the incarnations of Legal Weapon's been
males.
Right? Yeah, unless I'm okay.
We had Margot Riaz was in my band. She was a guitar player, but she was in the band for a little while, and we wrote a song together. But she didn't stay in it because for various reasons, various personal reasons. I think at the time she was going through some things, but I wouldn't disclude, if it was I didn't look just for guys after Patricia left. If I could have found somebody, that was as good as she was or better, I would have said, sure, play.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. But I was very particular about bass players and drummers because they support the whole rhythm of the band, and if they're not good enough, man. Because by then, there were a lot of bands, like one of the first shows I did with, this was the Silencers too, as I remember. We played a place called the Blah Blah Cafe, and it had to be 79. And there was maybe 15 people there. It was like one of these Sunday afternoon shows. And I said, well, who's the other band? Oh, there's some guys from Redondo. It's Black Flag.
Oh.
They've never played up in LA at all. It's one of their first shows. Keith was the singer at the time. And we played first, I think. And then they played. And I mean, my jaw just hit the ground. I go, these guys are fucking amazing. Who are you guys? And I talked to Keith, and Keith and I later got to be very good friends. When he was in, oh my God, I can't even think anymore. When he was in his other band, he started, he'd always come up and, sing with me. And when I played with Black Flag, I saw how, like, the punk rock scene was changing, too. It was like, from that moment on, things seemed to change, because I remember thinking to myself, my God, there's this whole different sound. And it was coming out of the South Bay, and then also out of Orange County. And that was like, it's from 79 through the early 80s, everything seemed to change, I'm having a moment here, like I'm getting like spaced out because I can't even think of Keith's band.
I know, but you will, and then you can just like blurt it out after, and we'll edit it in or something.
Okay, yeah, please.
It'll make it look like.
Because I'll feel like, oh my God.
Editing magic.
It's the Circle Jerks.
Yeah. Oh, is it the Circle?
Yes.
Oh.
When he started playing with the Circle Jerks.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should have known that too.
Yeah, that's all right.
That's all right.
There's millions of bands now. That's why.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, when Lethal Weapon started, how did audiences respond to you, or like the punk community respond to you?
Actually, they responded pretty good. I think they liked it better than the Silencers. And we played the Hong Kong Cafe a lot. We played Raji's. Oh man, there were so many. See, that was another thing. There was a whole club scene then. Madam Wong's downtown. I remember playing down there a lot. And, you just had to kind of stick with it. There was, at first, some of the only thing that I kind of felt a little depressed about was or not depressed, but a little bummed about, was to see some of the other girls that were in other bands that were singers get an attitude. Like, they didn't either want you on their bill because they felt it was competition. And that, I thought, was really crummy. Because that, I was, my thoughts are, you help other women. You don't, look at them like they're your competition and your enemies. Because believe me, a woman will save your ass a lot faster than a guy will pat you on the ass. If you reach out, it really is true. And because, I just look around, and all the things that have been done for me basically have been done by women. As far as my career and stuff like that, it was women that were behind me, helping me. So.
And this is just always my own curiosity, but did you and your bandmates approach Lethal Weapon like it was a job, like that's what you were doing? I'm sure you didn't make tons of money. So what did you do to like supplement your income and support the band and recordings and things like
No, we had day jobs.
Yeah.
I was a prop maker. I went into Warner Brothers Studios. This is when I was like, obviously I had left college. And I went down to Warner Brothers Studios to Human Resources and stood in line one day, and there was a gal standing in front of me, and I said, what are you applying for? And she said, I'm going to apply for secretarial or clerical. And I asked her, I said, well, what do they make? And I think at the time it was maybe $9 an hour. This is like in 80 or 79 or something, I don't know. But it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And I thought, okay. And then I asked this guy behind me, I said, what are you doing? And he said, prop maker. And I said, well, they're like carpenters, right? They build the sets. And he goes, yeah. And I thought about it. I go, okay, so you got to cut wood and you got to learn how to build blueprints. And that's what I filled out. And that's what I got. And I got my first job there. I stayed on the set. I worked for an old Italian guy that said, what the hell is the union sending me? Because I had short white hair and I had a nose ring, and they thought, my God, and they said, you can't come to work looking like that. And I said, I have my, attire on that I'm supposed to have. And I came there every day. I worked all the overtime and I got my card in 30 days.
Did you have any prior experience? Like
Not
well, manual labor?
Sort of. I mean, I just mechanically, I was always kind of inclined mechanically to do things. I was more interested, like when I was little, it's like, don't give me a Barbie doll, give me a Lego set or something like that. Yeah. Or a Tonka truck that moves, don't give me dolls. I didn't want dolls.
Were there any other women doing that? Were you like the only?
There were 5 of us and there were 1,500 men. So not very many. And they had affirmative action at the time, like shortly after I had gotten in, which really screwed up the unions, I'm sorry to say. I had to take a test to get in there. I had to know what was what and what went where and what you cut with and all that stuff. And when they brought affirmative action in, they brought a lot of bad labor in. You have to know what you're doing because it becomes a hazard. And I worked with hazardous people, and it's very dangerous. I watched somebody lose their life on a set because of people not knowing what they're doing. So I wasn't for affirmative action in that way. I don't think they should have changed it just to get people in, to get minorities and women in. I think you should keep it the way it is and let people come in that want to do that. I wanted to do the job, and I enjoyed it. I was in the union for about 13 years. Yeah.
You did that the whole time you were doing music?
No, not the whole time, because I remember it was really hard too. I was a lot younger though. I was like, in my early 20s. And it was, I'd go out and I'd do these shows during the week or whatever, or even the weekend, and I'd have to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning, so I'd be up at 5. I remember I got in the habit of like getting half dressed and going to sleep. And then all I have to do is put my boots on and my hard hat and go out the door, because it was hell. And then my boyfriend at the time, the guitar player, he didn't work. He just played guitar, He had one job, I think, the whole time. But he wrote a lot of music and took care of the house. So.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask what it was like living with and being in a band with your husband.
It was all right.
Like not that bad.
No, it wasn't, because I really loved him at the time, and we were very close. So, and we really had a real passion for this music. Music was very important in our lives. It was the most important thing. It's just like you're a writer, you're photographers. That's a passion. And if you have somebody that's your significant other that enjoys that with you, it's even better, I think.
Yeah. You recorded, I think, and I could be mistaken, but your first 3 like full-length albums were on Arsenal Records,
right?
Which was your own record label.
Correct.
How did you decide to start your own label? I mean, I think it's something that people do now, self-releasing their own music, and there's the internet now and streaming, but was it a lot more difficult back then? Was it more cost-effective? How was it to promote yourself?
It was a little bit more difficult. You had to have, like I said, you're younger, you have a lot of drive, and we were just sort of like this. You just had these blinders on. You knew what you wanted, and you just kept your focus on that. I mean, we did I think it was an 8-track live with Patricia. It's got No Sorrow, is on. It's called No Sorrow, and Brian and I literally glued the covers on. You know, we sat there and glued 500, records, the covers on them. And it was really funny because I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who used to be in the Nip Drivers, the guitar player. And he goes, I have that. And sure as heck, he brought it out and it's all tattered and torn. And I said, listen, keep that because that was glued by either Brian or I. And that record got us, started. The hard part was like when we started pressing like 1,000 records. And once we did like Death of Innocence, that one we pressed 1,000 records and they went within a week. And then we got Green World to do the distribution because we showed them on paper. And then within a month, we had sold like over 5,000 copies. That sold like approximately 20,000 copies, which was a lot for back then. That was like one of our best ventures as far as doing it ourselves. And then Your Weapon, that was another one that was pretty good. We did like Your Weapon was that after Death of Innocence, and then Interior Hearts, and that was also on Arsenal. And then all that stuff got sold to Green World. Oh, not Green World, Triple X.
And I'm not sure if I think that this is right, but Interior Hearts, that was going to be on a major label, and I think it was like A&M or something I read.
And yeah,
and you changed your mind, or they were
no,
trying to...
that wasn't exactly it. What happened was we had Hunt Sales was producing us, and things got out of hand in the control room. And I don't like to lambaste people because of habits they have, but some things went on that we weren't aware of. And as a result of it, people were, not the band, we weren't using any drugs of any or any substances at that time. But later we find out that a lot of money had been taken from us and somebody had been using it to get high with and coming into the studios getting loaded. And as a consequence, the A&R guy found out about it and dropped us. Not us, but dropped the people that were working with us. And that's not a good way to start your career. And I think the A&R guy, he felt sorry for us because we were just really naive about stuff like that. You have some slick telling you, yeah, don't you just want to be an artist and write? And it's like, of course I do. But it taught me a lesson, you've got to watch your money and you've got to have your mind on that and your business and everything else because people, they just take it. They're ruthless, and these are people that you think have your best interest, that have worked with you for like a half a year, that have gotten your drummer playing fabulously, that's gotten the band writing well. And then they turn around, maybe they felt they deserve that, but you don't deserve to come into the studio where you're incapacitated, and you can't work. Yeah. And that's what happened in that situation. And I was really disappointed with that because this person, he's very, very talented musician. And I liked working with him. I met some interesting people there. I've been really fortunate. Our guy from, he's passed away now, but Alan McDougall from BMI introduced me to wonderful people. I got to work with John Entwistle from The Who. I got to record with him and Bonnie Bramlett. And it was like, I wouldn't have these opportunities if it hadn't been for them. But at the same time, when you're working with people, you have to really be open and aware of who you're working with. And yeah, unfortunately, the not Death of Innocence, Interior Hearts, that didn't go over with A&M because of that one instance. But maybe it wasn't supposed to happen, and we got another major interested later.
I read something totally different. It was that they were changing all of your songs and that Lindsey Buckingham was supposed to come in and do a guitar part or something.
No, that was A&M.
Oh, okay.
That was A&M.
Okay.
No, they got a lot of stuff gets mixed up, but Lindsey Buckingham, he's a hell of a guitar player. Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want him to come in? I don't know if he would be the right person for our band. I mean, we had somebody come in and play guitar parts, and it was Craig Ross, who wound up playing with Lenny Kravitz. So I'm not opposed to playing with, people, that come in and do that and add something to it. I welcome it, but it's got to fit the music,
Yeah.
you know.
And it sounds like you got pretty successful fairly quickly, like those first few years. How much did you tour? I'm just like, how hard did you work to like sell all those records that you were talking about, like 20,000 records on your own label with a distributor, and then getting discovered, or
We worked
getting
very
signed to a
hard.
major
We
label?
toured a lot.
Yeah.
In the early 80s, we'd do these little junkets where you'd do these Southwest tours all the time. You'd go from, you'd start out, you'd do a couple of shows in LA, and then you'd go through Vegas and Arizona, Texas, Louisiana. Then you come back and you do some, gigs coming back, and then you go up north. And what's really weird is like we never went and we never played Washington and we never played Oregon.
Oh.
I know, and I really wish we had, we played like we played Colorado and Utah and places like that, Nebraska, and most of the states, but for some reason we never played Washington and Oregon, and these are, big music scenes up there.
Yes, it seems like especially that time period in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
you would have been very successful.
Yeah.
Up there.
And we didn't play, we played San Francisco, but not a lot, and we had a really good demand for us up there, but for some reason, I don't know what it was, we just didn't get up there enough.
Yeah. Did you ever go outside the U.S.?
Yes, many times. Many, many times. We did 4 European tours.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Who did you tour with?
We toured with ourselves and we met up with other bands over there and played with them. Bands like Snuff and, oh gosh, I can't even think. A bunch of different bands, but we toured. There was a guy out there in Hamburg named Goliard, and he's helped a lot of bands, a lot of American bands. And we toured out there. I think the first tour was in '92.
Yeah. And how were audiences over there compared to U.S.?
Oh, they were great.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun.
I hear good things about European audiences.
Yeah, Germany is very has a lot of places to play. Probably out of all the countries, and I didn't have the opportunity, unfortunately, to play England. See, that's what I mean. It's like, why don't you go play Washington and Oregon and England? It's like, and I didn't get to do that. But Germany is one of the biggest places you could possibly play. And when the wall came down and you had the DDR was opened up, it was their East Germany. You had more places, but I'd say Germany and France are probably some of the best places. Italy's very good, and the people they're wonderful. They treat you really well. They have a lot of squats there. Their punk rock over there is a lot more political. They have like the Sharps and the Skins and then the different types of political stances that they take. So it's pretty cool.
And what was I know you've had a lot of bandmates. There have been a lot of changes in Lethal Weapon over the years. But generally, what was your relationship like with your bandmates, and what was the band dynamic? Like, did everyone play a part in the writing and the recording process?
Yeah, well, I always encourage people to write because it keeps the music fresh and it brings something else, and hopefully it gets them interested in the band and makes them feel a part of it. But some people they're just not, made that way. They just want to play. And that's fine too, but play well, And I think the guys that were in the band the longest was Adam Maples and Ed Bingaman. They were in the band for like 8 years. And they were sort of our Orange County connection because at the time we were playing like when I first recorded Death of Innocence, Steve Soto and Frank Agnew were on that record. They recorded on that with me.
Yeah.
And shortly afterwards, Ed and Adam came in, and we used to share a rehearsal studio down in, I think it was Fullerton, with Social Distortion. So we used to go down there all the time and rehearse. And there was like this little bond between us. And then Godzilla's opened up, and they used to come up here and play. That was a really great club. Unfortunately, it didn't stay open long enough. But it was like after the mask was gone, there weren't any places that had these fabulous shows until Godzilla's came along, and they would have like, oh my God, GBH, The Damned played there, all sorts of bands. They'd have like out of town bands come in and play, and then they'd have really good local bands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you categorize Lethal Weapons music? Because you're categorized as like hardcore punk or hardcore punk band, but then it seems like kind of later in your career, after your first 3 records, and there was some protest or pushback from people who thought like your sound had changed, which
It did change.
Music, like evolves, but
yeah, it does.
Punks
Well,
call it selling out, but
yeah, but it's not really selling out. I don't think. I think it's just a question. You can't. I mean, I think unless you're the Ramones or something, you can't keep playing the same thing. You want to evolve. And yes, you're going to have albums that people like, and you're going to have ones that people don't like. And it's just like I've been in the studio now, and my God, the stuff I'm writing now is vastly different. I've got conga drums and horns and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, it's fun, to change. It's fun to do other things. I don't want to stay in a rut. Any musician worth their salt, they want to experiment with other things. And that's the biggest, problem that they have, either with the record companies or with your fans, And then eventually it's like, then other people, either you get a whole new set of people or people start to like it.
And I thought this excerpt, there's this book, Going Underground American Punk, 1979 to 1989, and you have a quote in there about the hardcore scene, and it says that you met a lot of women writing for and publishing zines, and a lot of women playing in bands. And you say, at the time we weren't really taken seriously, and when people start fighting and getting really aggressive, a lot of women thought the whole thing was stupid and stayed home. Eventually that included me. And I'm like, I don't know if you remember saying that, but I thought it was...
No.
I thought it was like an interesting take about women participating in the hardcore scene, because I think hardcore was more...
It was a guy thing. What happened with the hardcore, it was just so testosterone. Everybody's going in a big mosh pit, and you'd see some little frail girl, she'll go get in there with all of her might and get swept away, and it's like you never see her again.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on. But because I didn't see women doing any hardcore really, and it's just like, come on, and nobody was, it was like for a moment there it seemed to get taken over until like I guess the late 80s, when bands like the Chili Peppers and stuff started getting a handle on more things, and the music that was, obviously it got signed to majors, but it was like Pearl Jam, bands like that, that pulls out of that, not that I like hardcore and stuff, I like all types of music, but when it becomes so stagnant and segregated like that, then where do I fit in? There's not a place for me, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't see a lot of women at the shows.
Yeah.
I didn't see a lot of women up on the stage.
Do you remember what you meant when you said at the time we weren't really taken seriously as a band? Because I was wondering, you seem like a band that's always been kind of respected and taken very seriously. So I just thought
I
didn't
don't.
know if
I
you
don't
remembered
know. I
something
don't
like
know
that.
what the contents of what the rest of the sentence was.
Um,
What article is this?
it's in this book, Going Underground. It's just it's kind of like an oral history of hardcore, like late 70s, early 80s in
Well, like
Southern
I said, I
California.
remember when the hardcore thing came on. Really, it was very prevalent. I remember going. I was at the Channel, I think, when we were doing a show in Boston, and the Circle Jerks were playing. See, like they endured, Black Flag endured. They were hardcore bands, they were guy bands. And when Rollins was in Black Flag, it was like, the Misfits, all those bands endured that real hardcore straight edge scene that was going on. A lot of Boston bands came out of that. And it was just like, like I said, it wasn't. I couldn't. I mean, I could see my band like still playing with the Circle Jerks and stuff like that, and I'd played with the Misfits before, and I played with Black Flag before, but it was like the bills were so different.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same. And like I said, it just changed. And maybe I don't know. Maybe I just a burr up my ass at that time, but I just couldn't see it. I mean, I guess I just didn't feel like I was fitting in. As far as respect, I don't know about that, but it was like the shows had changed, and a lot of the crap that happened with us with the majors really put a damper on a lot of stuff.
Was that the Life Sentence to Love album?
Yes.
88. Okay, what happened there?
Oh.
Because I noticed that was just one album on a major.
That's on MCA.
Yeah.
And the A&R guy that signed us was a great guy, and the guy that produced us, Dave Jordan, was a great guy. But what they had to go through and listen to wasn't so hot. First of all, they're taking orders from somebody in accounting what they want on the record. It's like, what do they have to do with anything? And it's stifling our A&R guy's perspective and what he wants to do with the band. He's the one that signed the band, and spent hours watching this band and bringing it in and getting us signed. And then he went on later to sign like Pearl Jam. And he did very well in this business, but he had to leave that label. And when he left that label, I thought, forget it. Because without him, what am I going to do? There was like no hope. They didn't have any bands like us. None.
So they didn't get rid of you. It was your decision.
No, we left.
Yeah. Okay. I'm always curious. Did you make any money being on a major label?
Yeah, you make money, but you got to remember you're going to have to pay it back. I made my money in like publishing.
Okay.
But what I did was after 7 years, all my publishing reverted back to me. A lot of people, what they do is they sell out their publishing. Don't ever do that. You make an agreement with them that they can have the publishing for X amount of years, and then you take it back.
Oh, okay.
That's what I did. So all my publishing is now mine again.
I think we were just interviewing someone who was talking about that the other day, about the publishing.
A lot of people have been really screwed over by publishing, and even with labels that are independents. I won't name any names, but people have literally by now made millions on these independent labels because so many people have been on them. The bands that have been on them have been very good, and they get nothing. They've had to change the name of the bands even because of that.
I want you to talk about anything like fun or funny that happened.
Oh God!
I don't know. When did the girl? You just started to tell a story about you saw a girl on the bus who said she was you.
Oh, there was a
way ahead, or was this
no.
that happened?
No, this was early on. It was probably I don't know, in '83 or something like that. But I used to go to when my mom was living down in La Jolla. I used to go take the train all the time. And Brian's family lived down there. His dad was a cartoonist, and his mom and dad lived down there. So we'd both go down on the weekends, and we'd take the train because it was nice, you know. And we were coming back up here, and this girl, she looked like a punk rocker, you know. And so I think we were in the club car or something, drinking some beer, or I don't know, drinking something. And we started talking to her. And she goes, "Yeah, well, I'm in music too." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "What do you do?" And she says, "Oh, I'm a singer." And I said, "Oh, okay." I go, "What bands are you?" You know, we started talking about bands that she likes and stuff. And I said, "What band are you in?" And she goes, "Legal Weapon." And I just looked at Brian like, "Hey, Brian, did you know this?" And she's like, and she's smiling at us like, you know, the world's open for this one. And I was like, "Oh my God." And I go, "You're in Legal Weapon, huh?" And I go, "Well, how long have you been in it?" As I said, "Is this recent?" And she goes, "No." She goes, "No, I started the band." And I go, "Really?" So somewhere along the line, we told her who we were. And I think she just got up and walked away. It was like, I was just like dumbfounded because so many strange things have happened, you know. I mean, strange things have happened to me on tour, you name it. It's just like being in a band is never dull. And I've had characters in my band. You know, I've had situations in my band where I've had instances. I had one instance where I had a roadie. I have a very dear friend of mine who's a lesbian and went on tour with us. She was doing our merch. And I think we were out in Oklahoma. And we had a certain portion of our fan base is gay. And this was early on in when we were playing. And, you know, to be gay and in Tulsa, I can't imagine. You know, so we were playing at a place called the Crystal Pistol. And I had a roadie that was just homophobic. And he would say the most incredulous things to my friend, and I couldn't stand it anymore. So somewhere, I don't know where we were, but I know we were in Oklahoma, but I told him to get out and get out of the car now. And we left him at a truck place and just drove away. I said, "Nobody's going to talk to you like that." I mean, nobody, because I just can't stand it, you know? And I've had instances like that. And I look back at it now, and it's kind of funny in a way, but at the same time, you know, the guys in the band are like, "God, Kat, that's shitty that you did that." And I said, "No, it's not."
Did you ever see him again?
Yeah.
Oh, was he mad at you?
He didn't talk to me anymore.
He made it back to LA.
Yeah, he made it back to LA. He made it back. So.
Oh, and the girl who said she was you, was there any part of you that found that flattering? Or were you like, "I've made it. People are pretending to be me"?
Well, you know, that's not the first time, though, that's happened. Because I had another person that did a Facebook with me and was pretending to be me and doing Facebook. That's why I do not do Facebooks.
Oh, so this must have been recently.
Recently.
Facebook hasn't been around very long.
No, it hasn't. But this was recently when Facebook first started. And I was living down in the South Bay at the time. And I'm like, they were telling me all this stuff. And, "Oh, why'd you put this on Facebook?" And I was like, "What the hell are you talking about? I don't even do that shit." And then I realized, I'm like, "Oh my God." And then I remember trying to open an account with Facebook. And I had trouble doing it. And then I found out why. You know, because of the name use and stuff like that. And I was like, "Oh my God." But people do some strange things, you know. I guess, yeah, it's flattering in a way, but then I think it could be getting kind of weird, too, because, you know, you don't know who you're dealing with sometimes. And people, like, for instance, I've done things for people, like, I don't like to see people in distress or, you know, if they need a ride or whatever. You'll try to help them, or you do help them, and they take it the wrong way. They take it as an invitation to be your buddy forever. And it's like, good God, what have I done? You know, you've gotten a friend for life, and it's like, it can be really dangerous. You know?
You mean like a ride from a gig or something, and it's someone who knows who you are?
Yeah, I've given rides to people and there was one instance the person was obviously too intoxicated to drive, and it was a female, and I gave her a ride home, and I think my phone would ring about 20 times a day, and it was like, You know, you just see that number pop up and it's like, no way, this can't be happening, you know.
Um, well, I mean, if you can talk just a bit about, okay, so we saw you live last summer, which
Right.
was one of just my all-time favorite shows that I've ever seen. Like, I left there in such a good mood, and I thought it was so great. You recorded a Legal Weapon album in '94, another in '92, and then you're also do you play in another band now, the Hellcats, or you?
Yeah, I had a band called the Hellcats, and then I had a band called Los Pistolas Coyotes, and we no longer have that
Okay.
because I think what I'm going to do now is pretty much my own project, and maybe do some of the Legal Weapon material again when I play, because a lot of people want to hear it. I've got a guitar player. In fact, Legal Weapon just played we played at the Echo with the Gears when they released their video,
Oh.
and that was oh gosh, that was at least 6 months ago, at least if not longer, and we played there, and it was a good show. You know, it's like I had to get Brian came out from Arizona and played because that's where he lives now. And Rudy, my guitar player from who I've been playing with for the last 5 years now, who used to be with the Brat, he played second guitar, and then Pat Ho and John Collinson played,
Mm.
and they loved it.
Yeah.
People love it. So I think I might start playing like some Legal Weapon music again, and then incorporate some of the new stuff with it.
Yeah, because you guys never like broke up and you never stopped doing music. It was just you sort of stopped putting records out every year.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
every other year.
yeah.
What were you doing when you weren't doing music? Like, were you still working at Warner Brothers, or how long did that last? Or
No, well, I went back to work at the studios for a little while, and then I let my union card go, and then I went to Europe for a long time.
Oh, just moved there?
Well, I'd stayed over there. I'd stay over there for like months at a time. You know, I'd go do a tour there, and then I'd go back and visit friends and go back and forth. And I was doing that for a while, and then I had just like a period of a little bit of downtime, I guess, where I was thinking of what to do as far as write music, and you know, it was kind of hard because now my guitar player is living out in Arizona, and those are people I was used to, and then I just slowly started getting back into the scene, you know, more or less. I never stopped writing, but it was just harder not to write with Brian, you know, because I had been, you know, spoiled writing with him all the time. But now I'm getting used to writing with other people, and it's been a really good experience, you know.
And you still were able to write with, you said you were married for 16 years.
Hmm.
You're not anymore. But I mean, was that just like amicable and you were still able to work together and
Yeah.
write together and be creative?
Yeah, after we had split up, and
Yeah.
you know, he had a girlfriend. Yeah, we still played. It was no problem.
And do you, how do you how do you approach lyric writing, or when you write lyrics for songs? Do you write like poetry or anything?
Yes, I just did the spoken word at Beyond Baroque recently,
Oh, okay.
out in Venice. And I hadn't done that in a number of years. I think the last time I did it was on KXOU or something like 15 years ago. But yes, what I do, I've kept journals ever since I was very young. I have like they probably fill this whole room, literally. There's just stacks and stacks of them. And I keep like journals, like, you know, like more like a diary of what's been going on. I keep journals like from tours, and then I'll keep journals for like lyrics. And most of the songs that I write, they're from personal experience, or what's going on, how I feel, or they're about someone else and what they're going on. Like in Death of Innocence, that album has a lot of what went on in my youth. And there's one song in there. I had a very close friend of mine that I had gone to boarding school with that wound up killing herself because she had been molested by her father. And here, this is a very prominent, wealthy family. You know, you'd never think something like that would go on. Their dad was a dentist, you know, and I was like shocked. And that sat with me for a long, long time, you know. And then I'd have people come to me and say, "Is that really true, that song?" And I said, "Yeah." It's like everything I write about's true. It's like not some fabrication because it wouldn't mean anything, you know. Because I guess a lot of people, some people, they do write about nothing, you know, or what they didn't do, I guess. But it's better, I think, to write from experience because then you wholeheartedly feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And so even when you're not making music, it seems like you've always been very creative. You said writing plays or even journaling and singing. Do you feel like having a creative outlet, do you feel like that is a big part of your identity, like needing to create or be creative or be creative?
Yeah, it is because I went through a couple of years, I think. I went through like a depression, basically. And in fact, I'm like coming out of it. It still seems like still. It was like I wasn't doing a lot of music, and I wasn't really writing a lot. And this friend of mine really started hassling me to get on the ball and start doing something, and I did, and it made the biggest difference in the world, and started reaching out and getting out more and stuff. And it was just like, okay, you know. Because if you don't do what's your passion or you love to do, I mean, we all have things that we like to do, but you usually have a passion. And there's like things I still want to do before I'm, you know, off the face of this earth, like write something, you know. I wanted to start writing like these. I like to write short stories for some reason. Ever since I was a kid, you know, I've always written these short stories. But I like to write like a series of them, like little incidents, like what happened in like tours and stuff like that, or a person I know that's just a character, and write about things like that. And start doing that, and then I was thinking, you know, get it when I did the spoken word. This one guy goes, "You need to get this printed," and I said, "Well, I will." You know, it's all coming around. It's just like getting used to it because I have another project that I'm working with Kurt from the Nip Drivers, their old guitar player, and I'm writing. He's doing sort of like an opera, and I'm helping him write some of the lyrics and songs, which will be real interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting and different.
Yeah, and I'm gonna record. He's gonna, you know, we're gonna record together on it. So I'm looking forward to it.
And yeah, we were talking, but I think this was before the cameras went on. It sounds like you're still pretty closely connected with a lot of the people that you were in the scene with, like in the late 70s and 80s, or in the punk scene in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the ones that are still around. Yeah, I still talk to them, and I've sort of rekindled a lot of friendships because a lot of people moved away and then they all came back.
Oh,
you know.
Well, yeah, you've stayed and then you like went to Europe.
Yeah, I went to Europe and I lived in San Diego for a while.
Oh, okay.
I went down there in the 90s. I was living down there. And in the late 90s, I was living down there again. I lived in Encinitas. And then I moved to South Bay for a while and had a straight job there.
A straight job?
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
Oh, it was a good one. I worked at a cemetery. You plug them, I plant them. I used to literally dig graves with a backhoe.
You did?
Yes.
Oh, see, that's interesting.
Every job I've ever had has been, I've had some really weird jobs in my life.
Yeah.
I've been an elevator operator when I was a kid, you know, with a 1909 Otis elevator. Go like this.
When you were a kid?
I was about 14.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty young.
Mm-hmm. I was at the Monmouth Hotel in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And it's no longer there. They tore it down, unfortunately. But it was this old Victorian hotel. It was huge. And they had this Otis elevator, and I got to operate it. At least
Why did you want to be a gravedigger?
Well, I didn't.
Like, think of.
I didn't know. I didn't want to be a grave digger. What happened was, I had to get a job, right? I had to live. So I looked at these jobs, and one of them was for landscaping. And I know how to do landscaping. In other words, I know like different trees and all that kind of stuff, and how to put sprinkler systems in and all this falderall. And I learned it all from Stephen Reed, the other guy that was in my band for a while, because I used to work. He had a landscaping business, and I worked with him. Because, like I said, I don't like working jobs at a desk, so I'd always work with something with my hands. And I went to this place, and when I went there, I went through a temp agency, and I get there, and the place looks like out of a horror movie. It's all these craggy-looking trees and overgrown weeds and a shabby-looking building. And I go and I talk to the manager, and they say, we need somebody to do the landscaping here and get this place looking like something. And I said, oh, okay. And I started working there, and I used to basically trim trees and do things like that. And then I learned how to run the backhoe and learned how to do services and got paid $10 more than I started on. So, yeah.
You've had some interesting jobs.
That was really weird, though. And there are ghosts and there are spirits, without a doubt.
Did you ever see one?
I felt it.
Yeah.
I just remember this one instance, and there had been a burial for a Filipino lady, and I was walking back up the hill, and I went, oh no, there's something really wrong. And I just backed up and went right back to the office.
Yeah.
So I'm not going up there now. There's just something wrong. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to, if there's anything that you, because I have some like closing questions, but I feel like if there's anything that I haven't asked that you wished I had asked, or if there's anything that you want to talk about, like I said, there's not much about you as a person to look up, so I feel very excited to be like sitting down.
Yeah, you get to be the first one to write it.
And I'm going to make a lot of money. And no kidding.
I hope you do. You worked very hard at this. Somebody's got to pay somebody.
I just feel like, I don't know. It's just hard to ask questions in a really short amount of time.
I know.
When you've had, it's like I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8 albums. I mean, in a really short amount of time. So it's like, I'm just afraid that I don't want to miss anything that is really important to you
Well, the most important thing to me, like I said, what makes me breathe to this day and what keeps me alive is music. Hearing it, seeing other artists play it, playing it for myself, playing with other musicians, and I mean that wholeheartedly. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't be here on this earth at this moment. Because I have some very dear friends that have, when I was in the doldrums, have helped me up out of them. I've had my beautiful dogs that have helped me up out of the doldrums, and I have music that has always been there, and it's those consistencies that just really make life worthwhile. And it's too short. Like I said, there was a lot going on within the last 5 years, that just seems like there was so much loss of people in the circle. And it was a little devastating, and we're losing good musicians and we're losing dear friends. And it's like, what the hell's going on? And there's like holes. But you can fill those holes in by knowing that, in some instances, like Duchess de Sade, we just recently lost her. She used to be with Haunted Garage. She was their dancer, and I remember her when she was 18 years old, and Ed Culver was doing her first photo shoot. She was absolutely gorgeous, very unusual looking girl, and just beautiful. And she's 45 years old, and she's gone. So, but she's not forgotten.
Not by a long shot. Neither are a lot of people. So.
And I know this is, I find most people that I interview to be pretty humble.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want you to be humble. I hope you can like think of this subjectively, but I want to know how you feel about your role in your contribution to rock history, or how, I mean, do you feel that you've been adequately represented?
Have I been adequately represented? No, probably not. Um, I think the main thing, what I always wanted to contribute to rock, obviously, is writing good music and music that people like, but is having this sisterhood of women that will continue to write more music and play more music, and helping other women. Guys can help themselves and other guys can help them. But I've always been a big advocate, like the girl from Blank Expressions, Rita. She's got a really great band. And I've always been pushing her, play more shows, do this, do this. And I've always encouraged her and told her, if you ever get stuck, I'll help you. And those are the things I think that really matter, and not to look at women like they're, like a jealousism type of thing, or they're another adversary. That's foolish, because I really do believe that, and I think because of like punk rock, it sort of buried a lot of those, conceptions that women, there was always a cat fight around the corner, and the competitiveness with each other. And I think that's died down quite a bit. So that's good. And those are the main things I hope I can contribute.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you, because I'm 35, so I totally missed you guys. And I only pretty much recently discovered you, and then really started listening to you a lot because of Alice. And seeing how much you influence, not only bands now or women now, but even other women in the scene at the time, like how much you influenced Alice, or I was thinking a lot about how it seems like when it's like a female fronted band or something, like you and X were kind of in the same scene, but it's like historically you can only have one or something like that. So
yeah, I
like
see what you're
remember
saying.
X, and
Yeah.
then, but at the time, I mean, you were just as influential and just as successful, I think. And
Well,
listening
X
to them all
was,
day.
they'd been going on
Yeah,
a little longer,
yeah.
though, too. And X is a very influential band. I mean, you think of the LA punk scene, that's one of the first bands you're going to think of. Bang. I didn't come up in the Mask.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was right after that. But, there was that small genre of people that did. And they were the ones that, if they endured afterwards, they got to stick around. And X has proved time and time again that they have longevity. And Exene is one of the best lyricists around, without a doubt. I mean, I saw her play a show at the Whiskey when her sister had just been killed, and I could not believe it. And I saw a whole audience say, "We love you." That's how much they loved that band. They were phenomenal. And she did that whole set.
Yeah.
I mean, and they do it for the fans because they appreciate them. They don't forget them. But X that's another story for my band, I think, in a lot of ways. It's like I think what happened with us, it was like a hit and miss type thing, and it was like, with anybody, it's where you are at the time, and then that's what makes you. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of really talented musicians, and what happened to so-and-so? You never heard from them again. Well, it's like they gave it up because they didn't go anywhere, or they just they couldn't hang in there. You have to be persistent, and you have to really want this. If you don't want it, then you're not going to do it. It's hard. 1% maybe get signed. 1% go on tours and do what they have to do. One of the hardest working people that came out of this scene has got to be Mike Watt, without a doubt. Never seen anybody work harder. Never saw a man that knew the limitations that he had that made the best of it, and look where he is now. Over 3 times on Bass Player magazine. You know, I mean, he's phenomenal. And you see these people, you know, that stick it out. I mean, that guy has like got 100 million miles on his trucks, you know. I mean, he puts his hours in. And you can't say that for everybody. And what these people get in return is they have a passion for it. That's all they want to do. That's all they want to do. And as long as they get recognized for it, that's all I could care. You know, that's the reward. So.
And then I guess just a general question. And I think if you don't have anything else to say, because I think you kind of said it in your last answer, but what are your thoughts on the visibility of women in rock history in general? Is there a gender discrepancy? Is gender not really an issue? And has it changed for the better or worse since you were working? I know it's like a 17-part question.
Well, it depends. Okay, first of all, it depends the type of music you're listening to. You know, if you're listening to the music you and I would listen to, I don't think there's a gender problem there. Now, if you're listening to some of the rap music, you know, it's like, even though guys say, oh, well, it's like, I don't think degrading women verbally or whatever is necessary. You know, I don't think that's the way to go. And then there's a lot of this pablum that producers have women do, and they become huge stars doing it, you know. But it's up to the individual. As far as women in the industry, you know, I think where you can really tell what's going on is when they get into places of the creative part and the artists. Not just being an artist, but if they're running the industry. That's where it really counts. You know, if they're the ones that are calling the shots and saying, well, these are the bands that we're going to sign. And they're signing them for those reasons, you know, and pure talent, you know. But I think it's gotten a little easier for women now. It's more acceptable to see a woman up on stage playing guitar, playing drums. A lot of women now, you know, and they're not getting pigeonholed. Rock was always harder in some ways, like for a female drummer. But now you see them like the Latin jazz, and jazz seemed to be a little easier for females. Now it's different. It's opening up a lot more. So it's getting better, I'd say, yeah. Without a doubt.
Anything else that you want to add? I'm out of questions.
No.
No. You can turn the air conditioning back on now.
Yes.